Alright, let's talk about the introduction and the conclusion for this paper. I say keep it simple. Introductions don't need to be that long, a couple of sentences to warm us up to your thesis, and conclusions, just a few sentences to cool us down. So let's keep it simple. I'll give you a couple of strategies to help you do that. The intro. I got a couple of ideas. First one, this one works great. Give us a short, very general history of your two subjects. Now, you don't have to prove anything here. You're not trying to convince me that you're an expert. Instead, go into the intro just assuming that I don't know anything about your subjects, and so you can give me a little bit of backstory just to warm me up to your thesis. Again, you're not trying to show me up. You're trying to welcome me into what your thesis is going to show me. So keep it short. Keep it general. The skate park essay does this really well. Let's take a look. This guy took my class in person, and he was obsessed with skateboarding, and he knew a lot about it. He didn't want to intimidate me out of it. He wanted to welcome me in. Remember, he's arguing, specifically, skate parks from the 1970s are very different from modern skate parks. So to get me ready for that thesis statement, he gave me some very loose general history on skateboarding. Take a listen. In 1972, Cadillac Wheels became the first company to manufacture skateboard wheels out of urethane, a soft, grippy oil byproduct. Prior to this, skateboards came standard with either steel or clay wheels, a slippery bone-rattling experience for the rider. This breakthrough swiftly propelled the activity from an age of crab walks and 360 pivots into what's referred to as the golden age of skateboarding. A time that defined the progressive direction of skateboarding, saw the first ollie and gave birth to the first skate parks. These parks of the past show where skateboarding has come, and looking back to them shows where skateboarding is headed. The skate parks of today sure have come a long way since then, but then again, so has skateboarding. In this new age of skateboarding, it can seem natural for some to look down on the outdated infrastructure and even rally together and demand a modernized replacement. And then we get that thesis statement. So notice what happened here. It just slipped under your radar because it's so casual. We get a history of the wheels and how they've evolved from these hard bone-rattling wheels to a soft, grippy, oil-based wheel. We then get a very brief history of the tricks, from these crab walks and pivots that are sliding tricks that happen on the ground, to the more modern ollies where skateboarders get the board up off the ground and into the air. And then we get a little history of the skate parks and how they've evolved over time. And then we get down to the nitty-gritty here, and we focus on skate parks of the 70s specifically, and skate parks of today, and how they're very different from each other. So great use of brief history or backstory to warm us up to that thesis statement. Now, if that strategy doesn't work for you, there's just something about it you don't like, or maybe you're writing about like a really modern video game that doesn't have any kind of history, or maybe you're writing about a band that has only existed for a couple of years or something like that, and there's not a whole lot of backstory to talk about, well then, you've got another strategy. It's called the flip. The flip happens when you take what you wrote in the body, for example, if your body is about differences, and you do the opposite in the conclusion and talk about similarities. Now, you'd be right if you were to go, wait a minute, you said we're not allowed to mix and match. But remember, if you look at my instructions and my rubric, it says you're not allowed to mix and match similarities and differences in the body of the paper. Doesn't say anything about the intro or conclusion, and that's on purpose, because I wanted to leave the door open for you to flip it in your intro if you wanted to. Let's take a look at the Pop Hits essay. Remember, this paper argues that Taylor Swift and George Washington are actually a lot more alike than you might think. But notice what she does in her introduction. She flips it a little bit here. Often described as a melting pot of cultures, the U.S. houses one of the most diverse populations on the planet. Whether or not it's true, the U.S. advertises an opportunity to prove yourself and build a career based on your skills, talents, and strengths. Because of this, many popular and historical figures have emerged in the country since its inception. Two very different figures in American culture are George Washington, the most influential founding father of America, and Taylor Swift, the pop superstar who has taken the country's radio stations by storm. So notice we get an acknowledgement that these two are nothing alike. So that's the flip in action. Remember, your introduction only needs to be 3 sentences ahead of your thesis statement, and that's what this one gives us. And so there's nothing wrong with this being, with your introduction being a little bit on the short side, as long as you meet the 3-sentence minimum to build into your thesis statement. And so the two ways to do that, I think, either a short general history or the flip. Here's what not to do. A lot of times high school teachers tell readers what you're going to tell them later on in the body. That's a bad move. Your thesis kind of does that. And so if you were to do that ahead of your thesis, it's going to make your thesis statement feel really redundant. Also, chances are, if you're telling them what you're going to tell them, you're giving away your topic sentences. And topic sentences are your secret weapon to anchor each one of your body paragraphs, and readers need those. They need the surprise of the topic sentence to remind them of the thesis statement. But if you give them away in the introduction, and then you've got your thesis with 3 prongs, and then you've got the topic sentences, your paper will feel really stale and redundant. So avoid giving away body material in the introduction, and instead try history, or try a flip. That brings us finally to the end. You've gone through, you got thesis, outline, you filled in the body, you wrote the introduction, now you're tired and you got 1 paragraph left. You got to cool us down after we've read the entire paper. So I've got 2 ideas for you. One of them I just talked about. It's called the flip. Let's say you go with a history introduction. Then you go through your entire paper and you show how 2 things are different. End it by flipping. Conclude the paper, bring us back around and show us those similarities and explain why people often confuse these things. Remind us when you had to discuss those differences in the first place. Now, the skate park essay uses the flip. It's subtle, but it's in there. Now, I have a big warning here. Only use the flip once per paper. Don't flip twice. The skateboarding essay begins with some history. It goes through and argues that old school parks are different from new school parks. And then, at the end, it flips things. And it shows all skate parks are kind of the same. Let me show you. Take a listen to this. Skate parks are a marvelous invention. Old or new, doesn't matter. They're marvelous. They come in all shapes and sizes and styles. They've only been around for less than half a century. Again, it doesn't matter if they're old or new. Even the oldest one is still pretty new. To some, they're eyesores that need to be pushed out of the public eye. Old or new, don't care. Most people don't want to look at them. Others, they appear to have some benefit and social impact. But to skaters, they seem like heaven on earth, and it doesn't matter. Old or new, skaters love them. At the very least, old or new, doesn't matter. Any skate park offers a sanctuary from reality. So whether they opened 3 decades ago or just 3 days ago, doesn't matter, because they all have the same reason for existing, to be thrashed. Excellent flip here. So this writer went through and showed us all these differences between these skate parks, gave us specific examples, made a robust argument, and then in the end said, but if you never notice the differences, you're not alone, because they do have a lot in common. And so that's how the flip could work at the end of the paper. But remember, don't use it at the beginning and the end. Use it at one or the other. So let's say you flip your intro so you can't flip the conclusion. Then how about this? Another great way, and I love this strategy. Write your conclusion as a sort of educational summary. Now, you're not looking at the weave paper this time around. You'll see on the next slide. But we will look at Pop Hits, because Pop Hits takes a very educational tone at the end. So, in the past, I used to have this essay that I used as an example for a while. It was on weaves, synthetic versus natural, and it argued that a synthetic weave is nothing like a natural weave, no matter how much they look alike. And in the end, it took on an educational tone, and it explained why readers need to understand the difference between weaves. Take a listen to that conclusion. Women need to understand that the type of weave they choose is important. They need to know that what they're paying for, because not all weaves are created equal in looks, cost, or stylability. There are things women need to keep in mind when they make the big choice. So this writer is reminding readers, if you're going to make this big purchase in terms of a weave, keep in mind, you're paying for the way it looks, There is definitely a cost difference in what you can do with it in terms of how versatile it is. You need to be aware of that, whether you choose synthetic or natural hair. Let's take a look at the Pop Hits essay, because this one takes an educational tone. Here, listen to this. While it may initially seem impossible to draw comparisons between these two vastly different figures, a deeper examination of their lives side by side reveals similarities that otherwise would have gone unnoticed. The intriguing parallels between Washington, the father of the nation, and Taylor Swift, the modern-day pop sensation, are important to note because they can help conclude American ideals, priorities, and interests. Examining the similarities between American icons, whether founding fathers or founders of pop culture, can show the nature of American culture and the figures who helped shape it. And so this is kind of a neat conclusion because it takes a very open-minded approach and shows how understanding cultural figures, whether they're in established history books or they're currently up on the stage with a lot of people hating on them, either way, they can be an important part of American culture. And they can be figures who shape that culture for years to come. And so it kind of pushes us to keep an open mind. Don't just look at those people who the history books have told us are important. Look at the people who you think are important. And only history will tell if they actually become important. So it's always key to keep an open mind. So great educational tone there. So there you have it. We're wrapping this paper up. You've got a couple of strategies how to start, introduce the paper, and you've got a couple of strategies how to wrap it up. Hopefully something in here was helpful. If you have any questions, head into Brightspace, shoot me an email, and I'll do my best to help.